John Tyler and the man who replaced as president, William Harrison, were both from the same place, Charles City County in the state of Virginia. In fact, most of the early presidents were from the state of Virginia. 6 out of 10 of them were. Tyler's father, John Sr., was a roommate of Thomas Jefferson when they both attended William and Mary College. So young John was very much part of the Virginia elite planter class. He was born just after the Revolution in 1790. He also went to William and Mary College. He studied economics and was greatly influenced by the great economist Adam Smith. He also served a legal apprenticeship to his father, so that by the age of 19 he was called to the Virginia bar. At the age of 23, 4 years later, he married Letitia Christian. They had 8 children, so that by his mid-20s he had become a very successful lawyer and had bought the Woodburn plantation with over 30 enslaved people in the state of Virginia. Tyler was also active in politics and had been elected to represent Charles City County in the House of Delegates at the age of 21. As a young politician, he was greatly influenced by the Jeffersonian tradition, arguing against the rechartering of the National Bank with senior Virginian politicians. As a strict constitutionalist, he was also opposed to the federal government funding any projects which could be constructed by the individual states. When the 1812 war broke out with Britain, he organized a militia unit in Virginia to defend Richmond. However, after a couple of years, he resigned as captain, as there was very little military action in the area. By 1816, Tyler, now in his mid-20s, had got elected to the House of Representatives, representing the 23rd District of Virginia. However, splits and factions were beginning to emerge in the Democratic-Republican Party. Some were states' rights activists, but others could see the need for a strong federal government to defend the country, especially in the aftermath of the 1812 war. 3 years later, Tyler argued strongly against the Missouri Compromise in the debate in Congress. As a strict constitutionalist, he believed Congress had no right to legislate for territories which were not yet part of the United States. He also opposed allowing states to join the Union on the basis of them being free or slave. He argued that this was a recipe for division at a future date. He believed that 1807 legislation which made importation of slaves illegal would eventually cause it to die out in the southern states, as was already the case in some northern states. Tyler also hoped that allowing slavery in the new territories would drive up the demand for slave labour between big farmers and plantation owners, and that the forces of economics would cause it to die out in a more progressive, productive age. Tyler was impressed by Adam Smith's economic analysis. However, as these issues progressed throughout the 1840s and 50s, arguments became more emotional and tensions between North and South became more intense, eventually leading to conflict. Tyler served as Virginia governor for 2 years and was then elected to the United States Senate in 1827. As a senator, he argued strongly against the Federalist policies of John Quincy Adams' administration. Tyler found Andrew Jackson's Democratic Republicans more attractive than the National Republicans led by Adams. Both parties were too Federalist for his liking, but he seen Jackson as the more preferable of the two. He found common ground with Jackson as a Southerner and in their common opposition to the National Bank. However, he was opposed to much of Jackson's proposed infrastructural projects which involved federal spending. Relations between Jackson and Tyler further deteriorated in 1832 when South Carolina passed a nullification bill which declared the federal tariff null and void. Jackson responded by introducing a force bill which would enforce the tariff by military means if necessary. Tyler spoke against the force bill, which really angered Jackson. However, he managed to retain his Senate seat mainly due to the influence of Henry Clay. By the mid-1830s, the Whig Party were beginning to emerge as a serious national party. Tyler joined them and became President of the Senate by the middle of 1835. By the late 30s, he had established himself as a serious national politician and as a strong defender of states' rights, which had a strong appeal in the South. The Whig Party leadership persuaded General William Harrison to be their nominee for president. However, Harrison lacked political experience at national level, so Tyler, as a strong states' right defender, became his running mate. Up to that time, a vice president had never become president, so Tyler's position was perhaps not given adequate consideration. The Whig Party strategy in the 1840 election was deliberately vague. Modern-type campaign techniques were used. Sloganeering played an important part in the election. President Martin Van Buren was branded as Martin Van Ruin because of the economic depression of the previous years. In contrast, William Harrison sought to capitalize on his war hero record in the Northwest with slogans like Tippecanoe Who and Tyler Too. Harrison and Tyler won the election with 234 to 60 votes in the Electoral College. However, the Tyler presidency got off to a rocky start. After only 1 month, President William Harrison died in office, and this created deep division in regard to the role of the vice president. No president had ever died in office, and so the American politics had moved into somewhat uncharted waters. The Constitution itself was somewhat vague in regard to the issue. Article 2 merely stated, "The powers and duties shall devolve onto the Vice President." The Cabinet, which met within an hour of the President's death, was split on the issue. Some wanted majority Cabinet rule to prevail. Disagreements, particularly in regard to the role of the National Bank, were dominant. Tyler's political enemies wanted to minimize his role as President. They wanted him to accept the role of Vice President, acting President. However, Tyler rejected these arguments and had himself sworn in as President, telling his cabinet they were free to resign if they disagreed with his decisions. He also refused to deal with all correspondence addressed to the Vice President. The 1840 election campaign had been deliberately vague on the part of Harrison and Tyler. They won on the basis of contrasting the war hero record of William Harrison with the dismal performance in office of Martin Van Buren as president. Tippecanoe Who and Tyler Too was compared with Martin Van Ruin in a clever electioneering campaign. However, once the election was over, some serious decisions had to be made. Most members of the Whig Party in Congress and most members of the Cabinet as well were in favour of rechartering the National Bank. However, the new President Tyler, as a strict constitutionalist and states' right defender, was opposed to this idea. By the early 1840s, the Compromise of 1833 had reduced the tariff to 20%, leaving the federal government with a serious financial shortfall. Henry Clay of the Whig Party in Congress brought forward 2 bills which would leave the tariff at 20% and disperse federal funds into the states. Tyler, as president, recognized that the combined effect of the proposed legislation would starve the federal government of essential funds, and he therefore vetoed both bills. The Whig Party in Congress were outraged by Tyler's vetoes. The Cabinet were also opposed. They all resigned with the exception of Secretary of State Daniel Webster. Webster was actually working on the Webster-Ashburton Treaty at the time, and he also wanted to assert his independence from Henry Clay. The cabinet resignation in late 1841 was designed as an attempt to force Tyler also to resign. It failed, however, mainly because of Webster continued to support the president. However, the Whig Party were very angered by the president's actions, so they expelled him from their party. Whig members in Congress also set up a 9-member committee with the intention of impeaching the president. They failed to get the necessary 2/3 to carry the motion, however. Eventually, the Whig Party restored the tariff to the 1832 levels, and the President allowed finances from the federal government to continue to support the states. It was an uneasy compromise between the President and Congress, but Tyler continued to be alienated from his party. On the 9th of August 1842, the Secretary of State Daniel Webster signed the Webster-Ashburton Treaty with Britain. This treaty resolved ongoing clashes and arguments about the precise location of the main British North American border. It was an important treaty in that it contributed to a more peaceful and stable relationship between Britain and the United States into the future. The Tyler administration also achieved an important treaty with China. Tyler, who was strongly influenced by the great economist Adam Smith, wanted to expand American business globally. In 1844, the Wankia Treaty was signed with China. It granted United States ships access to Chinese ports on a par with British shipping. It also guaranteed protections to American citizens inside China. Like all previous US presidents, Tyler was ambitious to expand the United States westwards. Texas became an independent state from Mexico in 1836. As an independent state, it claimed territory on its northern and western border, which it never really controlled. Many of its citizens were Americans and wished to become a state of the Union. By early 1844, the admission of Texas as a state had become a central political issue in the United States. In March 1844, John Calhoun became Secretary of State. From South Carolina, he was a strong supporter of Texas joining the Union as a slave state. However, the Democratic-Republican Party were divided on this issue. Leading presidential contenders Henry Clay of the Whig Party and Martin Van Buren agreed statements whereby they rejected Texas as a state for the present. In doing so, they misjudged the political mood and allowed outsider James Polk to become the Democratic-Republican nominee. In 1844 also, Tyler conducted negotiations to annex Texas, but his treaty was rejected by the Senate. He also attempted to set up a third political party with the slogan Tyler and Texas, but found support levels too weak to continue. Although Tyler's attempt to annex Texas failed, the issue continued to dominate American politics throughout 1844. Ex-President Andrew Jackson supported James Polk's nomination and ordered him to bring back John Tyler into the Democratic-Republican Party. For Tyler's part, he recognised he did not have sufficient base to win the presidential election and therefore supported Polk for president. In his last week in office, Tyler signed two bills which admitted both Florida and Texas into the Union. Texas' entry was completed at the end of 1845 under James Polk. There were 27 states in the Union at the end of Tyler's presidency, and the population of the United States was about 20 million. Tyler got married a second time while president and had another 8 children. When the Civil War broke out, he sided with the Confederate side in 1861 and is considered by historians to be an average president.